Welcome to another episode of Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, where today we are on our 9th character in our in-depth review series, and we look at our first premium character that will be making their way to the Hall of Fame, and that is Sun Fac. The gameplay you are watching right now is from Rom180. He is from my guild, the Den of Ren, and he is kind enough to go ahead and share some gameplay of Sun Fac. Now, before we look at Sun Fac, let's go ahead and pull up the Hall of Fame and see where we stand so far. Right now, we put General Grievous in the Padawan category. However, recently the developers upped the level cap to 85, where we see lots of new gear be integrated, as well as every single character being at tier 11. So a lot has changed in the data, and this Hall of Fame may be revised after looking at the characters once all the stuff has been finalized and people start using the gear. So let's go ahead and talk about the history of Sun Fac, and this is a character that has not made many appearances in the mainstream Star Wars movies that pretty much everyone has seen. However, he has appeared in many Star Wars novels and also appeared in the Star Wars Republic Commando video game. But mainly, Sun Fac's purpose in the Star Wars universe was to serve as a key political figure for Poggle the Lesser as Chief Lieutenant. This position of Chief Lieutenant was noted by the tusks at the edges of his mouth. Regardless of the dangers that lied ahead, he was known to push lower workers to the extreme despite the harsh conditions. One of Sun Fac's main attributes was that he possessed a very strong exoskeleton, which protected him from the brutal attacks that his enemies attempt to exert onto him. Poggle the Lesser found Sun Fac to be a valuable asset and used him for anything, in leading battles to even being a ruthless executioner, where we see him convicting Anakin Skywalker and Padme Amidala and sentencing them to their death. Sun Fac's story eventually came to an end in the Battle of Geonosis, where he attempted to flee. However, a group of clone commandos were tasked with assassinating him. As he fled to his ship, it was damaged by the commandos, which led to his ship crashing, ultimately leading to his death. And in Star Wars Galaxy of Heroes, we see many of his traits from the video games as well as his story, where he possesses a very strong outer exoskeleton, which helps him survive harsh conditions and brutal attacks from his enemies. So like always, let's go ahead and talk about how we unlock this character. Originally, he was released only for Erodium packs for roughly $200. He can be yours at 7 stars. And now, you can get him in the Chromium packs, where it is reported he drops pretty frequently, and around $200 may get you him to 7 stars. Also, in case you do not want to use Chromium packs, you can also get 4 shards of him for 320 crystals in the daily shipments, but do keep in mind that the drop rates are very random. So let's get into the nitty-gritty and the bread and butter of our in-depth reviews, and that is the pros, averages, and the cons of our character here, before mods are even considered in the equation. And for the pros, we have a lot going on here that really builds on his story from Star Wars, and that is the fact that he is one of the most defensive characters in this game in a lot of categories. And to demonstrate this, let's go ahead and look at his protection. And as I mentioned before, the data has changed drastically due to the new level cap and the gear changes. So what I'll be doing, I'm going to note the averages for each category beforehand and what they are now, so that you can have an idea how much they changed, and then I'll go ahead and place the character in the ranking system for each and every one of those categories. So as I said, he is number 1 in protection, and the average essentially went from 15,844, and now the average for protection is 19,336, and we see Sun Fac. And I'm not even joking here, this is absolutely crazy. He is at 37,136 for protection, which is just absolutely absurd and out of this world, and it's going to be pretty awesome. Next, furthering demonstrating his defensive abilities, he is number 8 in health. The average went from 16,557 to 18,997. Sun Fac is at 26,430, which puts him in the top 10% in health. Moving on to armor, another great defensive attribute that he has. The average went from 205 to 227, a very mild buff here. And Sun Fac is at 313, again putting him in the top 10% for armor. Now we're going to talk about potency. It's not an important attribute for every character, however it is quite important to Sun Fac, since he can remove turn meter, strip buffs, apply debuffs, It's a very, very important attribute. And he's actually number 20 in potency, so he's doing good here. Average went from 28% potency to 31, so again, a very mild bump from what was before. Sun Fac is at 42% potency, which is quite sufficient for many of your daily needs, such as Arena. And because of this puts him in the top 25% in potency. Next, a very, very important thing, because this could technically be his drawback if he cannot wave off potential debuffs, and that is Tenacity. Fortunately, he has somewhat high Tenacity that can try to wave off stuns and shocks and whatnot, and he is number 9 in Tenacity, where we see the average being 27% before, and it very slightly got bumped up to 28% after the new gear. We see Sun Fac at 35%, which puts him at the top 10% for Tenacity, so looking good in regards to waving off those major debuffs that could slow him down. And just another random thing, he can steal 15% health when he applies damage, and the average normally is 9% for characters, but we also see he's able to gain even more health through various abilities that he has, which we will talk about momentarily. Now, what about the average? What is Sun Fac in the middle of the road for? Well, he's in the middle for one thing, and that is maximum damage. He is number 41 in maximum damage, which isn't too bad nor too great. The average actually had a slight bump here. We went from 4,726 being the old maximum damage to now 5,260, which is the new maximum average damage right there. And Sun Fac, he lies at 5,272, which pretty much puts him on the top 50 and just on top of that average essentially. Now the cons. Two major cons that we have here. However, they're very easily addressed due to his abilities that he possesses, but we still need to make note of them because they are quite bad. So on paper, we see that he is number 82 in speed. The average for speed went from 122 to 126, and Sun Fac is seen at 109, which puts him in the bottom 15%. But as we'll talk about later, his abilities allow him to get a lot of counterattacks and a lot of attacks in between without him even getting to 100% turn meter. So again, this could be addressed easily. Next, the next thing that he'll be using quite frequently, this is all you'll see him doing, is applying his basic damage, which is at number 87 in the game. The average went from 3,846 to 4,273, and Sun Fac is seen at 3,027, which puts him in the bottom 10% in basic damage. But as I said again, he has special abilities which allow him to do plus 15% damage on counterattacks, which bumps this to about 3,481, still keeping him very low on the spectrum. So we talked about the history, we talked about how to unlock him, we talked about his stats before mods or abilities are even considered, and now we talk about his kit, which really does follow his Star Wars story of how he punishes and intimidates those who attempt to defeat him, and he also ensures that he can protect those he serves. And the first ability, which is what makes Sun Fac absolutely awesome, is known as Browbeat. And what this does is that it deals physical damage to the target enemy and dispels all positive status effects, every single one of them, and then he recovers 20% of his max health if he removes any effects in this manner. So the damage that comes out of here is 2,739 or to about 3,027. Even though it's on the low side of the spectrum, the fact that it removes taunts, buffs, offense up, speed up, whatever, it is absolutely crazy how he can do this just with his basic attack. The next ability is known as Subjugate, which essentially is his taunting ability where he taunts for 2 turns and inflicts offense down on the target he is looking at for 2 turns with a 55% chance to also remove 40% turn meter. So this guy, he can taunt, and as we'll find out soon, he can even counterattack. So when he counterattacks, he uses his basic ability and removes taunt. So this is a quite deadly combination here. The next attack that we have here is known as Spiteful Strike, and this is his highest dealing attack, which deals physical damage to a target enemy, and if the enemy is suffering any negative status effect, Sun Fac recovers 25% of his max health. And without mods, we see this attack do usually around 4,770 to 5,272. And this is nice if you are constantly applying critical chance down due to his special ability, which we'll talk about next here. he's able to go ahead and get himself 25% health using the special ability. Next, we have superiority, and this is what really compensates for Sun Fac's lack of speed. So he has a plus 50% counter chance when he gets attacked. And then in addition to that, when he attacks outside of his turn, he deals 15% more damage, which we mentioned before, and he inflicts critical chance down for 2 turns. So what does this mean? Well, one means if he's taunting, normally people have to keep attacking him, and if you keep attacking him, it's pretty much a heads or tails if he's going to counterattack you. And if he counterattacks, he goes ahead and he strips away your buffs, your taunts, whatever you have going, applies critical chance down. So this can get pretty nasty depending on the situation. So that's actually somewhat of a good thing that he's slow, because that means when he's taunting, he spends more time taunting and keeps counterattacking because people have to keep hitting him one by one. And even when there's an AoE attack going on, he can counterattack and then slow down the critical damage that's coming by applying critical chance down on Lando, Biggs, Wedge, lessening their chances to apply some major critical damage to your team. So with all this in mind, let's go ahead and talk about the gear requirements. And with the gear requirements, something has changed in the major way, besides the fact that numbers kind of increased across the board for your purple, blue, white, and green gear, all that great stuff. We have a new level of colored gear, and that is the gold gear. And that's going to be right above purple and right under the raid gear. So we're going to talk more about that in a second, because that's something that you can't quite access just yet until you level up more. You start unlocking some of the dark and light side battles, and as well as the new raid that's coming out sometime soon, you'll be able to unlock this gold gear. And also, every single character in this game can be at tier 11, and no character as of yet can get the tier 12. So what that means is that now there's more of an equal playing field in terms of tiers. Some characters before were at 11 or 10, and there was a disparity between those characters, and now everyone's on the same playing field in terms of tier levels. So let's go ahead and see how this kind of affected everything. So in terms of raid gear, we see that Sun Fac needs 2 pieces of raid gear, which is actually below the average. The average for raid gear now bumped up to a solid 3, which before it used to be about 2 to 3. Now it's definitely a solid 3. So Sun Fac is below the requirement for this. And the 2 pieces of raid gear that he needs are the Mark 5 Droid Collar and the Mark 7 Nubian Scanner. To put this average into perspective, Sun Fac is actually pretty good, mainly because when you look at characters like Darth Sidious, Boba Fett, Newt Gunray, their amount of raid gear is 7, so 2 pieces of raid gear for a pretty good character is not bad whatsoever. Stepping away from raid gear, let's go ahead and talk about the gold gear, which is the new fun stuff that we can't get our hands on just yet. The average amount of gold gear in this game is 199, and we see that Sun Fac's actually below this average. He only needs 110 pieces, and that means he's in the bottom 30% in terms of gold gear, which is actually quite nice, because when we get onto purple gear, we see that he is a big monster when it comes to purple gear requirements. The average actually jumped up quite significantly here. We see that the average before was 722 for purple gear requirements, and now the average is 1,341. So almost a doubling in terms of purple raid gear, just under doubling, but still that's quite a lot. So that means farming for purple gear might get a little bit harder for us. Sun Fac though, he needs 1,870 pieces of purple gear, which is a lot, and that puts him in the top 5%. And in terms of a single piece that he needs quite frequently, like what we see of Anakin Skywalker, he needs a lot of purple stun cuffs. He actually has a lot of various pieces that he needs, but the most frequent one, in case you just want to stock up on it, is the Mark III Carbanti sensor arrays. That is the most popular purple piece of gear that he needs, but again, he requires a variety of popular purple gears like stun cuffs and whatnot. Moving on, we're not going to go too much in detail in terms of green, blue, and white. All you really got to take out of this is that he is pretty much right on average for those. Nothing too special like Emperor Palpatine, where he needs a lot of blue gear. Now let's go ahead and talk about my random tips, recommendations, if you should farm him. And pretty much when we look at the premium characters, Sun Fac and Rex, they're just known to be the best premium characters in the game, and they've held their value quite well since they were first released. We see Rex being used in Arena, we see him being used for the raid. Sun Fac, he's kind of one of those all-around characters. No matter what meta you're in, there's always some kind of annoying buff that everyone gets, critical chance up, a taunt. He's going to be your guy, and he can counterattack and remove the buff from his basic ability. And also with that, Sun Fac has very strong pros and very little cons that are easily compensated through his abilities. So whether or not you should farm him really depends on your situation and your willingness to spend money. But if you really like to spend money and money is not a concern for you, he is definitely a great character to purchase. And he's, again, about $200. We'll usually get him to 7 stars. But again, that's very subjective. I personally will not be able to buy this character. I can't throw that much money on a game like this. But there are people who are willing to spend, and Sun Fac would be worth the investment. And also, he counters many different types of metas that we had. He was able to counter the tank meta where we just had multiple people taunting. He can go ahead and apply, his critical chance down and remove buffs, which is quite nice. Even in the current meta where there's just AoE damage coming from left and right, we can see that he gets aggravated by this. He goes ahead, removes the taunt from Stormtrooper Han, Poe, Royal Guard. So really, he's going to be a very useful character no matter what meta you're in. There's always going to be some sort of buff out there. You're always going to want a good counterattacker to remove a buff. It's a very powerful primary ability that he has, and that's really what makes him shine. And just being a character that has high health, high protection, that can taunt, counterattack, remove buffs, and apply debuffs, just all through his basic ability, it's been deemed quite overpowered by a lot of people. And that's one reason why people love to have him, because it's just that basic and counter attack abilities that really make him shine. And although he has the low speed, it really doesn't matter too much since he frequently counterattacks, and the goal of him is to taunt for a very long time so he can constantly counterattack over and over again, removing taunts from other characters, removing critical chance abilities. You want to make sure you get rid of that. And the only drawback, it's not really a drawback, it's more of a strategy that can work pretty well against him, is that once he is stunned, his purpose kind of gets lost in the game. But again, that's kind of like with any other character. If someone gets stunned, they're not helping you out, so it's nothing specific to Sun Fac. It's just that he really needs to not be stunned to be an amazing character. But that applies to many other characters out there. So when we're considering what types of mods you should definitely pick mods that either have a health set and that multiply his health and protection. But if you are really concerned about him being stunned, you don't want him to be stunned because he's just great. He tears up the battlefield when he's not stunned. You might want to consider putting tenacity mods on him. They might be worthwhile just so you're ensuring that he's not being stunned, he's not being shocked, and you're just trying to make sure he's not being prevented from participating in a battle. So let's take everything we said and quickly summarize this and put him on our Hall of Fame. So to summarize all this, we see that with the combination of a very high defensive stats, somewhat average maximum damage, and the ability to taunt and counterattack and apply strong debuffs, remove buffs, assuming that you and I don't mind spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on this game, he is definitely one of the best characters to buy, and he is definitely a character that scares people away in the arena because he can be quite deadly and he can definitely throw your beat off when you're trying to go ahead and conquer someone else in arena. So with all that in place, let's go ahead, pull up the Hall of Fame and see where he stands. And as I mentioned in my last video, we placed General Grievous in the Padawan category as of now. And when we look at Sun Fac, from the Grandmaster to the Youngling status, he is going to be placed in the Grandmaster category. Emperor Palpatine has been holding on to this position for quite a long time, and it takes very strict requirements to get up here. One of them that I definitely look at is that, can he counter a meta? Can he define a meta? And he does a great job countering the current meta, countering previous metas. And we also just look at the blend between abilities and the stats and see how they kind of work together and fight off against other characters in the game. And between his high health, protection, all that great stuff, the counterattacking, the taunt, and the buff stripping abilities, it's a very, very powerful combination that it only has by his own. So there you have it, guys. This was our first premium character. He is landing in the Grandmaster category. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you think about him, if there's something I didn't mention that you think is worth noting. Also, feel free to check out the link below to see my inventory so we can go ahead and do another in-depth review. But thanks again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and we'll talk again soon. Peace out.